Stranded Deep has crash landed to Xbox Game Pass, but you can also play it right now if you have PlayStation Plus Extra. We'll be taking a look at the game on Xbox Series S, but before we jump in, if the game intrigues you, I'd highly recommend going for the PC version if you can get your hands on it. It is just superior to the console version. With that said, we'll be covering a new game every single week in 2023, so if you enjoy the video, consider subscribing. Now, we're making the best of a bad situation and letting you know if Stranded Deep is worth your time. Stranded Deep did not make a good first impression at all. It started out okay, pretty standard plane crash and road to shore. I dragged my raft and got to follow the tutorial. Made myself a pile of rocks and a fire, maybe this won't be so bad. Then I was told to find a crab, and that's where it all went wrong. Sometimes the starting island doesn't spawn crabs. I walked around for 20 minutes, found nothing, rode to the next island, explored a shipwreck, and then walked around for another 20 minutes before it got dark and I couldn't see anything. Still no crabs. After making myself a hot chocolate and reading a bit of my book in real life whilst waiting for daylight to come so I could actually see these crabs that were so important, it took too long and I gave up and just started a new world. The second attempt actually allowed me to complete the tutorial, but that didn't make me feel better about the hour of my life that was wasted because you can only save at shelters. Now, you might be saying, but dude, the shelter is right there in the crafting menu. How did you not figure that out yourself? That's not the takeaway here. Stranded Deep is a survival game that, whilst not complicated, does have a tutorial to ease new players like me into the game. It is a massive issue if you have a random chance of the tutorial just not being completable. This is the crown jewel of the lack of polish that plagues the game. Before I go into a full-on meltdown of my dislike for this game, I would like to point out the few things that I did actually enjoy. There is an endgame to work towards, but it is not a direct requirement. I like this in survival games. If you want a goal to work towards, then you have an ending to find, bosses to kill, and you need to make sure you don't die in the process. But you can just as easily ignore all of that. Building towards the endgame does create a good sense of gameplay progression and elevates the experience beyond just surviving indefinitely. When everything comes together, the game creates a great sense of dread. Rowing to this aircraft carrier in my tiny raft in the middle of a storm was actually terrifying, as was salvaging shipwrecks whilst sharks circled. You really do feel alone and vulnerable, and it's easily the highlight of the game. If you have thalassophobia, you're gonna have a bad time in the best way. Also, the game has hammerhead sharks, which are the best animal and should be protected at all costs. And that's it. That's all the solid merit I could find. I really just had a bad time with Stranded Deep, and it started before I'd even crashed my first plane. Why are some of the menus confirmed with the A button and others confirmed with the X button? Nothing like accidentally launching your first world when you're just trying to alter settings before jumping in. This should have been picked up on the first gameplay test. I have no idea how it made it into a full release. The game as a whole feels incredibly clunky. For example, here's what you need to do to collect one drinkable coconut, the only water source at the beginning of the game. Climb a tree, but make sure you're angled right because you can only move up and down trees, not side to side. Grab coconuts, climb back down, open inventory, drop coconut, smack coconut until it changes, pick up coconuts, and finally drink. I can understand the realism angle, but this feels like gameplay getting sacrificed at the altar of realism. Exploration is sort of fun, but there's barely anything to actually explore. Islands mostly just serve to gather more resources and loot more shipwrecks. I only had one instance of I want to go there and see that, and it was when I spotted the aircraft carrier. When I got there, it was a disappointing one-way street. That left me with resource gathering, which is fine in of itself. Fishing is decently fun, as was exploring shipwrecks, but it very quickly gets repetitive. The idea of character leveling is a solid one, but I really dislike the idea of crafting levels. A better system would be to lock higher level gear behind tougher materials to gather, rather than the hard level lock that exists currently. I understand that the game is meant to be hostile towards the player, who slowly conquers that hostility, but I think the beginning of the game could use some tweaking. Coconuts are your only initial hydration source, but drink too much and you get sick and lose all of your hydration. Food goes bad and you get sick from it, but I found no mention of this system before encountering it. I also got randomly poisoned whilst wading in water. This has no early game cure or fix, you just have to wait it out. There's a lot of things here that you just find out by trial and error, and it can be frustrating to die of something you were never even warned of. A more nitpicky thing that bugged me was the fact that durability is buried in the inventory menu. I'd have liked to be able to see how much durability my tools have in game, rather than having to stop to check. The game also allows you to play online, but every lobby I joined was met with connection errors or being told to leave by the host, so unfortunately I cannot comment on the co-op gameplay. In the end, the more I thought about having to play Stranded Deep this week, the more I dreaded it. There is some merit here, but overall, and I hate to say it, the game just isn't very good. For a game about oceans, it's also surface level, and we're giving the gameplay here a 2 out of 5 for the little merit it has. Art direction has one saving grace: the environment. It looks pretty good, and is always a joy to simply look at. There's always something fun to see underwater, and on land the environment is lush. It's not perfect, but it is nice to look at. Animations are really clunky, and mostly just bad. It never feels like you're connecting with the world. The death animation feels completely tonally inconsistent with the rest of the game. I burst out laughing when it happened. Weather effects are immensely cheap. Waves just phase through the island as if they're not even there. The rain effect looks like a screen overlay, and the clouds don't change in massive storms. Ah yes, this almost clear night is definitely the weather for this massive tropical storm I'm currently in. UI is entirely function over form. This is fine, and given the choice in survival games, this is the way I prefer it. The music is very generic and very repetitive. I found the best moments of the game were when the music just wasn't playing and the rest of the environment was brought to the forefront. Overall, the above average environment design does not save the rest of the art direction. The game simply feels cheap, and it pulls me right out of the experience. We're giving the art direction here a 2 out of 5. Stranded Deep opens with you having a plane crash with the calmest pilot ever, and then you have to make up your own story before reaching one of the worst endings in gaming. Environmental storytelling is practically absent. Sure, there are shipwrecks, but there's nothing to find on them aside from loot. Even the big boss monsters aren't explained. It is nice sometimes to fill in the gaps of a world as a player, but it feels like I'm being asked to do all of the legwork with Stranded Deep. There's just nothing here, and not enough to make your own engaging story beyond simply surviving. This is a short and sour 1 out of 5. Stranded Deep is a technical mess. Be warned, the more you play, the more it falls apart. Content-wise, you're getting a decent deal: 25 islands to explore, 3 bosses to conquer, solo or online. There's not a ton here, but it is enough to make the game feel complete. You do get multiple save slots, which is nice. Settings are an incomplete mess, which is at least in theme. Audio has sliders for master, music, environment, effects, voice and UI. General has a toggle for crosshair, item highlighting, tutorial and auto walk. You can also change camera view between first and third person. Wildlife can be toggled between normal and passive or turned off completely. There is a toggle for volumetric clouds. This is the only graphics setting you're getting. Controls can be toggled between 3 schemes. They are not remappable. You can invert the y-axis, and there's a slider for sensitivity. There are no accessibility options to speak of. As is in theme, The content offering here is just barely saving Stranded Deep from a 1, but the lack of settings and overall bugginess keep the game locked at a 2 out of 5 for specs. Commitment wise, Stranded Deep isn't terrible. Hard drive footprint is a tiny 1.6 gigabytes. It'll take you around 20 hours to hit the ending, but you can play for as long as you like. The ending is a separate thing. You have complete control over when you go for it. You can only save at shelters. This isn't a massive problem, as shelters are relatively easy to make, but if you forget to save, there is no getting your progress back. This also goes for if the game crashes. It's very easy to feel like your time is being potentially wasted with this save system. This is also a concern with fitting the game into your free time. If you're going somewhere new, make sure you're taking the materials to craft a shelter with you, because the trips can be very long. Overall, Stranded Deep doesn't ask a lot of your time or hard drive, but bugs and some gameplay decisions may lead you to feeling like your time was wasted. We're giving it a 3 out of 5 on our commitment scale, perfectly average. Stranded Deep is not worth your time. It's that simple. Nothing about this game manages to break average, let alone excel, and the very few merits found in the game are not worth having to put up with everything else. I won't be surprised if this ends up being the worst thing I play all year, and I am beyond happy that I finally escaped the nightmare by just putting the controller down and walking away forever.